Hi everybody. So today I actually recorded an online panel discussion here from Erasmus Studio, and I was very happy to speak to many experts from all over the world. We had experts from Europe, but also from Japan, and everybody has a very different backgrounds. So what we discussed is how you can actually develop new healthcare technology in healthcare, and that's always a challenge because you have many stakeholders, you have many issues regarding financing and actually rolling and implementing the technology. And so what I discussed today was how you can do that, what are the key challenges. And I also discussed how you can communicate this. How can you actually effectively communicate your key messages about the development you're making? How can you test that in an effective way? And we also had a really good discussion about how you can really then move on to the next step and really make people happy with your technology. So I'm happy that I had this discussion, and I hope you will enjoy the panel discussion as much as I did. Thank you. So, welcome everybody here on this fantastic day. We are having a panel discussion today with Eiji Onchi, Andrew Tollinton, Christian Mercado, and Jacob Visser. Thank you very much all for coming here and joining me today from different countries. We have basically people from all over the world. I think it's good to immediately start with some introductions, and then we will continue and develop the discussion a bit more and go into detail about some specific topics about digital health innovation. So perhaps we can start with some introductions. Eiji, can you maybe give us a short introduction of a few 1 or 2 minutes about your work and what's your relationship with digital health innovation technology?
Yes. First of all, thank you for inviting me. Good morning, I guess.
Good morning, yeah.
My name is Eiji Onchi. I am currently a PhD candidate at the University of Tsukuba in Japan. My formation is in mechatronic engineering, and then I did a master's in design. I focus on how to design social robots that will interact with people in everyday life. My main focus is how to express emotions using robots in non-humanoid shaped robots. So if you imagine something like in Star Wars BB-8, which is a ball-shaped robot,
Yeah.
but you can still feel a lot of warmth toward the robot, that's the specialty I am doing now.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, sorry, did you want to add something more, Eiji?
Yes, so for the healthcare systems and the devices, I also did my thesis in smart beds for hospitals, how to control hospital beds using brainwaves, for example, or wireless communications. And then now I'm specializing on how the patients or how people who need to monitor healthcare will interact with these devices, and hopefully in the future will be more automated and intuitive to use.
Okay, great. So it looks like you have a wide variety of expertise in different kinds of technologies, which is great because we also have other people who are developing these kind of technologies. Let's have a look at Europe now. In Denmark, we have Christian Mercado. Christian, can you share a bit more about your work and give us a short introduction?
Yes, and thank you for the opportunity to be on with you here this morning. My name is Christian Mercado, and I am Head of Unit for Digital Innovation at the Health Innovation Center of Southern Denmark. We are a part of the region of Southern Denmark, which employs approximately 24,000 employees, most of them based at our somatic and psychiatric hospitals. Additionally, I'm also the chairman of the Danish Interregional Coordination Forum for Telemedicine, which advises on and coordinates telemedicine efforts across the 5 regions of Denmark. And some of the work that we are involved with at the Health Innovation Center is currently quite a few different telemedicine projects. We're currently in the process of implementing home monitoring of COPD patients. That is a national effort in Denmark, which has been split into 5 sub-projects spanning different parts of Denmark. We're also in the process of implementing home monitoring of pregnant women who experience complications during their pregnancy, so that they can stay at home and be monitored from there, instead of staying at a hospital tied down to a hospital bed. Also, we're in the process of updating a system that we use in Denmark for telemedical wound assessment, where the nurses in the municipality, they can photograph wounds on patients at home, and these photos are submitted to doctors at the hospital, which can then assess the wounds and see if it's necessary to bring the patient in for a checkup, or if everything is fine. Additionally, we're also involved in many other projects, and most of them characterized by having a focus on telehealth and telemedicine, but also having a focus on connecting the different parties of the healthcare system in Denmark, hospitals, municipalities, and general practitioners.
Wow, that is many projects you're working on currently. Thank you very much for sharing that with us. So it's great we have you on as well. And I actually also invited you because through my research, I saw you guys have quite an impressive lab there in Denmark. And I'm sure you can talk a bit about that also more later in the panel discussion. Because with the students currently, what we're doing is we're going through a design thinking cycle where we help them define a problem of a new healthcare technology, and we help to create them, we help to test this technology, and hopefully also actually suggest it to different hospitals here in the region of Rotterdam. And actually on that topic, Jacob is actually also involved directly with our students, because he has already, if I understood correctly, given an interview or has been involved with this project. So maybe we can switch now to the home base here in Rotterdam. Jacob, can you give us a short introduction about yourself and your expertise at the moment, or the project you're working at the moment?
Yeah, so my name is Jacob Visser. I'm a radiologist by training. And as of January 1st this year, I've been appointed as the Chief Medical Information Officer of the Erasmus MC. On that respect, I'm connected to all different kind of IT projects, and I'm particularly involved in 3 of them. One of them is the telemonitoring of pregnant women, and then especially if they develop hypertension. The second project is regarding vital functions in the hospital. So we would like to monitor patients with very state-of-the-art sensoring technology, so that the physicians will be able to go there earlier and prevent them from going to the ICU. And then the third topic is about the involvement of dermatology, which also uses images for the detection of potential malignant lesions.
Okay, well, it sounds like you're also working on a lot of projects, so I'm happy you all made some time just for this online panel discussion, and I'm really happy that you're here also, Jacob, because you are our go-to medical person here in the discussion, so I'm afraid you also have that role to play here. But no, thank you very much for joining us. Now let's there is also a very interesting participant here, Andrew. We've known each other for a while. We did a lot of Toastmasters together in London Business School, and you've always inspired me about how you communicate with the audience. Now, we've talked a lot about technologies, but there's also a whole spectrum about how do you communicate your ideas? How do you communicate your ideas to investors? And Andrew has done a lot of work in that area. So Andrew, can you maybe introduce yourself a little bit and your work?
Hello, thank you, Peter. Hello, Andrew from London here. I have a background in software and finance, but I also have a personal passion for communication. Hence, I came across Peter in the public speaking club at London Business School. I guest lecture at various business schools, incubators and accelerators, helping organisations express their idea, which at an early stage for a business is very important, not only to investors, but also to customers, partners and other stakeholders.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Andrew, for your introduction. And I'm very happy that we have people here from various backgrounds and also various countries. So I hope we can feel free all to join the discussion whenever you want to add something. So we will now start with to explore the first topic, which is about eHealth of telemedicine innovation and the challenges surrounding that. And then we will move on to actually the communication and the pitching of those ideas to actually the clients or the investors who are also involved in these projects. So let's start off with development of eHealth and healthcare technology robotics. Maybe let's start with Christian. So Christian, you developed a lot of a lot of technology, a lot of different areas also you've worked in. We heard about COPD, cardio. You're also involved in Denmark in the regional communities. But Christian, what are if there are a few things you could give away to students and to help them struggle with the struggles they are facing in this process? What are the lessons that you've learned when developing all these different technologies?
Yes, I can try to give a few examples. Developing telemedicine is definitely a difficult task, and some of the greatest challenges we face when developing and implementing telemedicine solutions at our hospitals in the region of southern Denmark are actually related to people. New telemedicine solutions entail new workflows for the clinical staff, and these new workflows usually have to be implemented in parallel with the clinical guidelines for treatment of patients in either the outpatient clinics or within the patients which are admitted to the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
The telemedicine solutions are rarely a one-to-one substitution for either hospital admittance or an outpatient or visit to an outpatient clinic. So these processes have to be incorporated into the existing workflows of the staff, and in order to do that, we need to involve them from a very early stage to ensure that we actually manage to develop solutions that
Mm-hmm.
fit within their workflows,
Yeah.
and do not develop too many parallel processes or too many different ways of interfacing with the patients.
Yeah.
And this is also key in regards to getting administrators and the hospital the leading doctors as well interested in these types of solutions. It needs to be cost effective,
Mm-hmm.
and it needs to not introduce a further burden on the clinical staff, because one of the keys in order to get the solution into the clinic is focus from administrators and managers. So that's one aspect. Another key aspect is the involvement of the patients from the very get-go. Many telemedicine solutions include a type of home monitoring where it's the responsibility of the patients to either take the measurements or use the equipment that is provided to them in some way, and in order to ensure that the the solution works as intended and that the measurements are valid, we need to involve them at a very early stage. And also, I think a key thing to note is that real problems occur in the real world. So that means if you want to test a solution, you need to test it in as real a setting as possible, meaning with actual patients, with doctors, and with nurses and other staff that are going to be involved in the solution. It needs to be done from the very beginning.
Yeah, and you've mentioned a lot of issues here, and I'm thinking maybe there's one example you could give where you saw that. You can give an example of how you maybe improved this process by involving patients or doctors. Is there one example you could give where you kind of tackled these challenges a bit?
Well, I could give a current example at what we're working with at the moment. We're involved with home monitoring of pregnant women, and one of the issues that quickly arose when we wanted to begin this project was that we were unable to find a vendor with a standard solution that fit the current needs that the hospital and the patients have. So what we did was we invited vendors of products that were similar to what we wanted we invited them to Denmark into a real session where we had the pregnant women that participated, and we had doctors and midwives and nurses participate, and then we had the actual hospital staff try out the different types of products on the pregnant women in order for them to get the feel of, well, what is this? How would this product work? Would this give us the data we need in order to monitor the patients from home? We also had the pregnant women try to put on the different solutions themselves to ensure, will this work? What are the different things that we need that we need to note when asking vendors to deliver these products to us. So that's an example of a very, very early stage where we actually bring all the parties together and try out different products in order to get the knowledge needed to know what are our requirements and what are our needs.
Yeah, and participatory design or involving multiple stakeholders in the design process seems really essential here in healthcare. And maybe one more thing I wanted to hear from you is, at the moment, is like you have this fantastic facility. At least I haven't been there, but I have seen the pictures and some videos. How did you? Maybe can you tell some small, maybe a very short summary of what happens really in that facility? Because it looks like a design lab where you invite multiple people and you have design sessions. Is that what the purpose is?
Well, that's one of the purposes. Originally, it was built in relation to the new. We're currently building a brand new hospital in the region of southern Denmark, and we originally built the facilities in order to test out the various designs for both the surgical rooms and the patient rooms. So we actually we've previously had one-to-one mock-ups of a surgical room where we've had the staff come through and test out how can we simulate the various types of operations in order to reduce the number of unique operating facilities we require at our the new hospital being built. So that's one part of it. And another part is also hosting workshops and various design sessions where we bring the different parties together and try to simulate future workflows in an environment as close to the real world as possible, because what we've learned over the many years we've been working with this is, as I mentioned before, in order to test for the issues that might arise in the real world, we need to test as close to reality as possible. So that's one of the ways that we use our facilities.
And it looks very impressive. I mean, I saw some of these rooms, and you really try to imitate this real hospital settings, which is quite unique, I think. As far as I know, there is a big design thinking center in Mayo Clinic in the United States. There is also some design center in London, but overall, I mean, there are not that many places in the world where you actually design new healthcare for hospitals. I mean, in actually design centers. That seems quite unique for Europe at the moment. So let's have a look here with Jacob, because Jacob, you've been involved with a lot of the technology development in Erasmus University. But how do you look at this at the challenges and the lessons that Christian discussed? Do you agree? Is it really about involving people early on and really getting everybody involved? And if so, do you also try to do that currently in Erasmus University? Because I know you are starting a lot of new projects there, also involving design. So maybe you can share a little bit more about what you think about the experience of Christian.
Yeah, so I definitely agree with Christian about the involvement of the healthcare professionals. I think that's the key, and it's the starting point of any eHealth or technical solution that you would like to implement. But it's the thing is, it is important to start with the need instead of starting with the solution.
Yeah.
A lot of doctors are being approached by industry, and then they say, okay, you can buy this or that, you can try it, but I think it should be clear that the healthcare professionals do have a need, and within that particular need, to fulfill that need, there may be different solutions, and you have to find the right solution to make sure that the need is indeed being fulfilled with that solution. Mm-hmm. So instead of starting with the solution, I think it's crucial to start with the problem, and to analyze the problem, to have a look at the whole process, and then come to the right solution. And of course, you need involvement of all the different stakeholders, and that's not only the healthcare provider, the physician. It can be nurses, of course, but it's also about the quality department. Is it really safe to deliver, to provide care in that way? Is it according to current legislation? Are there any security protocols, continuity plans, and stuff like that? And also, of course, the IT department, because it's necessary that all these different IT components are able to appropriately connect to each other. So from an IT perspective, you definitely have to think about the architecture that's needed, also for the long-term stability.
Absolutely, and I'm happy you mentioned this, because it can't be emphasized enough, in my opinion. That's why we are also starting with the problem and exploring the problem here at the Erasmus University. The students really have 2 weeks to dive into the problem before they actually start developing a solution. However, we both work in a real world organization, and there's always a financial aspect. There's always the board of directors who are pushing for results. There's always the managerial people who want to see results quickly. And I'm wondering, this could be a question for any four of you, but how do you deal with this challenge of you need time to explore the problem and really go in depth and really find out what is it the patients need and what is it the healthcare professionals need before you can actually develop a solution? And that might take quite some time, and that might be actually quite costly. So how do you deal with these challenges of going deep into the problem and still hoping to deliver something at the end? Anybody wants to take this question?
Maybe I can give us an answer from the technical point of view. When developing any device or robot, you don't have the ideal budget or the ideal time frame. So we usually start with the minimum viable solution.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the minimum steps you need to take to get a working prototype.
Mm-hmm.
And then early optimization is mostly done after you have proven that your concept is going to work.
Mm-hmm.
So the first steps are mostly find the most basic solutions and the easiest solutions to make something work. Once you know it's working, then you can start working on improving each single step.
And Eiji, you have some award-winning designs. Is that how did you have a large budget, a large time to develop that, or is that something you actually, are you always working very tightly with these minimum viable products? Is that how you currently, is that standard procedure for you? Even for the award-winning designs, or are those designs really designs you need a lot more time and money for to develop that?
So one of the designs you're talking about, it's mostly on the concept part. So for that one, we can imagine a future where all these technologies are available, the prices are manageable. But when we try to do an actual working product that users will use in the end, we try to start from each individual piece, each building block, and then usually we don't develop the whole product at the same time. We just separate in different sections, and then, for example, if we need to measure heart rate, we should only focus on a device that measures heart rate correctly, and then we think of a way to integrate that into the overall design. Then we go to the next step, like, for example, measuring your keeping track of the location you are with using GPS. Once that works, we integrate. So it's like designing small pieces that are more manageable, and we can actually get those components, or we can generate the budget for those small devices and then integrate together.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, having the ideal budget is not the common thing.
No. Okay. Anybody who wants to add something to this?
I'll come in if you don't mind just for a second, Peter. The points you made about what people need, one needs to be mindful that what people need is not what they want. So when you're producing something, one needs to differentiate between the two. Mm-hmm. People would typically go for what they want, and then perhaps you give them what they need. Mm-hmm. Because the need normally means that there needs to be an education before they move to wanting it. Mm-hmm. And the second thing is, how does one validate the MVP, which Eiji was speaking about? And it's very easy to get people nodding and saying yes, that they need that product or want that product. The real challenge is actually to get them to put their hands in their pocket or equivalent to validate that need. Mm-hmm. And you can spend literally years of your life doing something because you've heard what you've wanted to hear, rather than actually seen a behavioural commitment to the product which you're about to go away and design. So one needs to be very careful around the validation of the need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's very, very important indeed. And indeed, again, it's about time management. It's about even managing maybe your own beliefs and dreams, because we all have a dream of wanting to create the best healthcare out there. But if you're creating something for a world that actually is not really existing, then it's could be indeed a waste of many years. And so I'm wondering, like, how do you deal with these challenges? Do you then propose, like Eiji said, do you propose to work with minimum viable products that you test early on? Because that's also what's described in many of the handbooks. We have Lean Business Model Canvas, all these. I'm sure you've heard of these. So I guess that's the way to go there. I see Christian also nodding, and some others.
Well, I'd like to pitch in, if I may. I think when talking about at least the way that we think about digital innovation is, on one hand, innovation is about creating something new that isn't there. But on the other hand, it's about looking at what existing components are there, what existing solutions are there that can be put together in a new way in order to achieve something new or fill a need or solve a problem. And I think that the mindset of using what is there or what's available on the market is a mindset that we're currently using in a project with one of our hospitals, where we're looking at how can we mobilize patients to a greater degree during while they are admitted to the hospital. Basically, the physical trainers want the patients to move more and not stay as long in bed while at the hospital. Now, what we're looking at there is, well, what devices are there on the market that can help us measure an activity level? Are the devices, are the sensors that can help us measure whether a person is lying down, sitting up, and so forth? And we try to approach this with what is available on the market, what can quite easily plug into the existing IT systems, and we have a great deal of those already at our hospitals. And can we solve this solution using simple products that are used in a way that they weren't necessarily designed for initially?
Yeah.
And that would give us the knowledge to see, well, is this solution something that brings a benefit to the hospital, to the patient, or is this something that we maybe should not explore as much further? So the idea of starting with what's there is also a way to keep the costs down and ensure we don't fall into a rabbit hole where we get too much involved in the different types of technology that we might want to be there but isn't available at the moment.
And Jacob, you mentioned that, okay, we are aware that there are problems and we need to tackle them from the beginning, right? So, and as Christian says, you know, just start with the minimum viable product, start with what's available. But how do you make sure then that you also early on already think about the bigger IT infrastructure? How do you consider that? Is that some? Maybe start off with the question first. Are people currently considering in the development of new healthcare innovation the infrastructure of the IT infrastructure of Erasmus MC? Is that currently happening, or would you like to have that to happen?
No, so that's currently not the case. So what we are currently doing is developing a vision and a mission. What would we like to go for when talking about telehealth? What's the governance? What is the mission? How should it be connected to existing platforms? Are we aiming for 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, or X platforms, or do we want to stick with one platform? How does it affect our strategic relationship with specific vendors? So that's currently a vision we are developing, and it's not into place yet, but it's something we keep into mind. And regarding the involving the IT infrastructure, I also would like to mention, when we're talking about needs, we have to distinguish between existing and non-existing products. So when there is a specific need, you see if there is a specific product, and if it fits your needs, then okay, you can buy that. But I'm also involved in research that is gonna improve the procurement for innovations that are not yet there. So, for example, that you ask the industry to develop specific products to fulfill your needs.
Yeah, and I think what you're also mentioning there is that there is not only, let's say, a challenge to get to the heart of the needs and involve early on, the IT people, there's also the challenge to think about the future needs. And future needs is kind of an interesting concept because also in design thinking, manuals, and in design, it's also an interesting aspect, because what you're actually trying to do is you're taking data from observations or interviews from people when you ask them, okay, what is the current problem, what are you facing? And then actually you're conjuring up, you're kind of imagining the trends of how the future would look like, and then you're thinking, okay, probably in 5 to 10 years' time, this product will still be useful. And how do you, let's say, how do you make that horizontal or more futuristic outlook? Do you, does any of you use specific tools for that? At what time do you consider like whether the minimum viable product will be interesting also for future users? Is that something that you are currently facing also in the projects?
If I may join in here. Well, in Denmark, we've recently acquired a telemedicine infrastructure across all our 5 regions and all our 98 municipalities. We've all come together and procured a telemedicine infrastructure, which is actually based on a microservice architecture, which allows us to develop it gradually in collaboration. And I think that's one of the key elements in how can we ensure that the investments we're doing in infrastructure is also will fit any future needs that we can foresee at the moment, but also the needs that we cannot foresee at the moment. That we've arrived upon this microservice architecture is one of the ways that we will hopefully be able to do that. Also within our own region, we're working with microservices. We've been doing that on some of the various projects that we've been involved with at the Health Innovation Center. And what we basically do is we develop each type of function that is needed as a service on its own, which allows us to at a later stage combine them into new solutions. And that makes it a bit more cost effective to develop new solutions, but it also makes it cost effective to develop solutions that do not necessarily have a huge target group or a huge group of patients that will be utilizing solutions.
Can I see this as you basically, is that something, the microservices, is that something like an electronic medical file management system, or is that like a general operating system for healthcare services?
It's even smaller. It's basically a service that can receive a value from a patient that has been monitored by a device. Mm-hmm. So that's a specific service, and that can basically be any type of device that you connect to it on the other end, and we can then use that service across a range of different solutions that we put together.
Mm-hmm. So it's basically a fundamental structural change that you're making in order to enable future solutions that may be useful to come on that. And what is, Christian, what did you do to, how did you come upon the solution? And did you do like, because there's also like future workshops, there's all kind of design tools you can use to imagine the future. Is that something you use in practice, or is that more like the magic? Is that not really happening in practice? Did you do some kind of futuristic thinking about this, or?
What we did was we actually had a telemedicine platform that we had procured earlier. It was a quite expensive solution, and especially compared to the number of patients that were on the platform. And what we thought about was how can we deliver the same type of service in a cheaper and more cost-effective way. And what we did was we started doing research and what are people working with in the other regions, what are people working with in the other European countries, and we did a quite extensive exploration on what type of ways can we solve this problem in a more cost-effective way. And what we ended up doing was actually canceling our contract with the vendor developing our old, quite expensive platform, and with the money saved based upon the contract, we were actually able to develop a new system on our own based on these microservices. So we actually managed to implement a new IT with the savings from a former contract, and with the monthly expenses now moving forward being lower and lower. So that's one of the ways that we've approached this problem.
Yeah, that's really good. I mean, that's really I guess that's a very good example of showing how you can actually make cost-effective innovations. And when we're thinking about, so Christian, you mentioned, so we try to use microservices. Now, when I'm thinking about structural changes, the first thing that comes into my mind is, yeah, okay, for structural innovation, you need structural changes. And so I'm thinking about Eiji's work and Robocop and other interesting robots. So Eiji, when people think about robots, they always think about some kind of amazing robots from the movies. But is robotics always that complex? Do you always need structural changes like a platform like we just mentioned, or can it be also much simpler than we imagine? I mean, how do you see that kind of robotics moving on in the future?
So I think for robotics, especially in healthcare, depends on the culture and acceptance of the society. For example, Asian countries see robots as friends, helpers, and
oh yeah, okay.
It is much easier to introduce a robot inside a hospital and tell them, from now on, this robot will help you get into the bed. Whereas in the most Western countries, the movies like Terminator are more war-oriented, so robots are seen as scary creatures.
Yeah, exactly.
And that is quite a hard challenge when trying to introduce a machine that will do what used to be a human job. For example, analyzing a CT scan, and we can ensure using different algorithms that we can detect with more accuracy a specific anomaly. But because it was made by a machine, people will say, I don't trust it. So even though numerically in numbers it's more accurate, for people's mind it's a scary thing, so acceptance will be much harder. In that sense, what we are trying to do is not to replace the job you see in robots or machines, but start by working together. For example, a nurse or a doctor together with a robot doing the same task. And the goal of the robot is to aid and facilitate this task. And then from the user's point of view, people will start seeing, hey, this is not replacing the care system with a cold machine. It's more like using a tool, and then it's much easier to introduce new technology.
And you've done this already a few times, and can you maybe give an example for us, maybe in Europe, because we are not used to, see many robots around here, but can you give an example of a robot that you helped to introduce in the healthcare system or help develop for a healthcare project?
So, for example, in the research collaboration with TU Delft, we were designing a robot that will be used at home to measure glucose levels in patients with diabetes type 2. And the main point was to identify who will be the user. And when designing this device, it's easy to think that the patient will be directly using the device. But in this type of robotics, we have two main users and that we need to design at the same time. The first one is the hospital staff, and the second one is the patient. And usually the information that the hospital needs is not the information that the patient will provide. For example, it's much easier for a patient to just verbally express their symptoms, or just put their hand into the device and the device will do everything automatically. They don't need to think or touch or select any options. But for the data part, it's much easier if all the data is already categorized, broken down, and sometimes you will see in a lot of interfaces that you need to select a box, you need to select a lot of things and then select submit. So this type of integration, you need to think quite a lot how much information you're giving to the patient side and how much information, processed information, will receive the hospital. So once you find this middle ground, I think it's easier for both sides to start using the device.
And is that not what the device you're talking about? Is that sounds like a software system? And does it look like something, or is it incorporated in another?
So we tried to make it physical. We were thinking of the objective goal was around 2030. So at that time, the main user group will be 50, 60 years old, which means they are familiar with technology, but may not be specialized in doing really tiny clicks on a screen, on a tiny smartphone. So our device was more of a dog-shaped device with a central knob that controls the whole device. So you only rotate using this motion. You don't need to have fine motor skills to select the options on the robot. And on the upper part, there is a reader that you just put your hand and it will take all your measurements.
Okay. Wow.
Now, when developing that, one of the main challenges as well is that current devices on the market are mostly proprietary. So the data is encrypted and you cannot access those measurements. Ideally, we should share a common system to share this data. But now, if you're not working with the company that developed this measuring product, it's quite hard to introduce any other device into a more complex system.
Yeah, and you mentioned also now again that there are people who need different informations. We're coming a bit back to the needs discussion here, and I wanted to bring in Andrew here as well. And Andrew, how do you differentiate between all these different stakeholders? They have all different needs often. How do you communicate that in the end? In design thinking, it seems like we are focusing on the user, let's say a key user, a persona. We focus on their needs, and which is obviously not the client most of the time, because the client is paying for your invention or innovation. And the persona could be like the patient or the healthcare professional, and you develop this robot that Eiji talked about, and then you eventually have to come back to the client, and you have to say, look, this is really what the patient needs. But do you have to then, is that convincing if you tell the client what the patient needs, or do you always have to kind of play the story that you have to kind of also make sure that the client is happy in a way by involving his needs? How do you deal with this tension between the needs of the client and the needs of the key stakeholders?
That's a good question. Probably the best example of triumphing in that is Disney, who take children, and the child wants the latest film or to go to the latest park, or whatever it might be, but they need to also sell to the parent, which is why they're being so successful. So one needs to be able to articulate the problem that the end user, in the case of Disney, it's the child, has, and your capacity to solve that, as well as then articulating the benefits to the person making the purchase. So we're relying here on the capacity for the client to have empathy with the end user. So you focus primarily on the end user, but at the same time you articulate the benefits to the purchaser, the buyer.
Mm-hmm. And what are, in practice, I guess these are quite challenging tasks, because maybe in the beginning you don't really know yet how to empathize with the user, or you don't really know yet what the client really wants or how you can satisfy him. So how do you deal with this uncertainty? I mean, this is, of course, a general challenge in the entire process, but is that common also, that you really face these uncertainties about you don't really know what they really need, and or
Well, there's a famous, you talked about the lean startup,
yeah.
the model canvas, etc. So there's the famous book, The Mum Test, that talks a great deal about relying much more on behaviors rather than intention. So one is always looking for confirmation and need affirmation through the behavior of the client rather than through what they're communicating to you. So the easiest way to do that, I'll give you an example. At the moment, I'm looking at an assistive technology with people communicating through Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of talking to people, end clients, and saying, your employees would really benefit from this, I create a website with everything looking like it's already built. I have a purchase button on there, and then I provide that to the client and say, in some way, I invite them to take a look at the website. They look at the website, and if they really want it, they will press on purchase or pre-order at least. So you're looking for affirmation through behavior rather than through word.
Yeah, and in that example you gave, is that because you're actually testing the website with the clients, is that, were you aiming to test if they are generally interested in it, or were you testing it in as if they would be the user? Or I don't know if they are the same person, but
yeah, so there's an element of education that one in that particular example, you would imagine they're both. But let's say you're pitching something which is to do with children, and you're talking to an investor who's a grandparent. Well, one hopes that they're a grandparent or the parent of some description. So you are trying to communicate the benefits to another person beyond themselves, but at the same time you're using language and examples that resonate with them themselves, with the person that's purchasing. So in the assistive technology example of something like Zoom, at the moment, if you look at the way that people communicate through Zoom, it's not all that great. But now that we have microphones and we have cameras, we can do a lot to analyze the performance of people. So wouldn't it be great to be able to get your CEO to be an absolutely A-star speaker through Zoom? Wouldn't it also be great to have your entire sales workforce to be far more effective and revenue earning through something like Zoom? It depends on what that person is and where they are in the company. The first question that I always face whenever I pitch into a large company is a corporate person in a large blue chip, is their first question is, will I get sacked for buying this product? So it's nothing to do with value normally. And as a result, if you had something like a mock-up website where you have a purchase button, you're looking for them to be able to see that someone's already purchased it, that the product is safe, that it's been tested, and then you test whether or not they would actually press on the purchase button. So it comes down a lot to who you are trying to directly pitch your value proposition to.
And so, I mean, there are two things there. I mean, one thing is you're saying, okay, behavior is really key, and so the students are testing currently, well, will test their prototype. Is that something you would also say then in the testing phase? Is that really, so even more than listening to what the user is saying, you really have to look at the behavior? Is that really what you're saying?
The behavior is, for me, behavior is everything. Yeah, behavior is the only thing you can really trust. Okay.
How do the others look at that? Are you looking at? Are you also making observations about users and really incorporating the behavior of people in your design as well? Maybe, yeah. I don't know if any of you wants to react to that.
Yeah. When I'm designing the robots, one of the procedures we do is present the device of the robot in front of the target user, and trying to explain as minimum as possible how to use the device.
Okay.
And just let them explore.
Okay.
And then you take notes on how they approach the device. For example, do they intuitively go to the screen to touch something, or are they looking for a button to touch? Are they speaking directly? Are they just observing without saying anything? Those type of tiny behaviors are key elements when we want to improve the interaction. And after that, we can say, maybe this knob here is not useful, so we need to change it to something that people will be compelled to use.
And in design theory, they talk about the tacit or latent needs. I'm sure you all know this, but there's still some. I mean, it still seems a bit like a magical box, right? How do you really pin down all these latent observed needs? Is there like, do you use a method for that, Eiji? Do you use like a qualitative research method to analyze the data then, or how do you really pin down and what the needs are?
When we want to formalize these types of measurements, one helpful thing is to record the interaction and then have different people evaluate the video using a defined set of behaviors. For example, did the person raise the hand? Did the person avoid looking at the product? Those type of behaviors are analyzed at what time and what is the context. And once you have different people evaluating the same video, it's much reliable to make a conclusion that this particular behavior needs to be changed, or we can use this behavior to make the product easier to use.
Yeah.
So that way you can transform this behavioral information into numeric data, and it's much easier to, if you want to do statistical analysis, or if you want to make a more data-driven decision later on.
Christian, is that also something, I imagine you're absolutely doing that in your design lab as well? I'm sure you are also using observations and looking at how people behave.
Well, at the Health Innovation Center of Southern Denmark, we have many different many employees with various different backgrounds and skill. Anthropologists is one. We also have people that have come from the hospitals, nurses, vocational therapists, physical therapists. We have more academics. We also have a few PhDs employed within various fields. And so we have a whole range of different competencies that we bring together on our projects in order to see what's required, how can we evaluate the benefit of the product. I'd like to give an example of one thing that we do more concretely and more regularly is we've developed an app-based solution for training at home when you need, for instance, if you need to physical training, and you can do that from the home. That's actually a part of the municipality's responsibility, but there's also a huge interest in it from a hospital perspective in regards to, for instance, a knee operation or some other type of operation. And what we do when testing this app is we utilize a software that enables us to capture both the users and how they interact with the software, and we then analyze those interactions to see if we've designed the solution in a way that allows the user to, or that becomes natural for the user to interact with the product in the way that we've envisioned. Then we can then make various adjustments to the solutions based on that input.
And what was that? Was that like is that standard procedure for all the products you are doing, or
no? We utilize different methods for different projects. We don't do research at our facility. We work with either real life testing or implementation. But naturally, we collaborate with a whole range of different parties, universities, hospitals, also a huge part of the project that we do, but also private companies and so forth. And then in regards to having a more scientific approach, we rely on collaboration with universities or other educational institutions.
So when we talked a lot about involving the right stakeholders or getting the right people with the right backgrounds onto the project. And of course, that's a massive, I mean, I think also that's something I found also in my research is that if you don't recruit the right people, it makes a massive difference. So I'm wondering maybe from each of your perspective, but maybe just start with Jacob here. IT, you have kind of, well, not you, but let's say IT in general has a maybe ambiguous, people look at IT from maybe in a good way, but also in a bad way. So I'm wondering, what's your experience today? Are people happy to involve you in IT projects, in healthcare innovation projects, or are they generally saying, look, IT, let's leave that for the last part when we have the solution, when the robot looks great, when the app looks great, then we'll go to the IT department and see how it can be implemented? Or are you seeing currently that people are involving IT stakeholders earlier on also in the process?
Yeah, so to answer your question, people are involving IT more and more from the beginning. Because what has been the case also until recently, that people come up with a project and they do not involve IT, and at the end of the day, the IT is not supporting the project, so then the project goes, and it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So people definitely try to involve IT from the beginning. And then, of course, they also see a role for me because I'm also a medical professional. So I am able to better understand their needs than the IT guys do. They usually look at the governance, the management, the security, the architecture, and stuff like that. Of course, this is important. I've been emphasizing that also during this conversation, but it's the patient is key. The patient is the central person, and he or she should benefit from the solutions. And I also could imagine that if the architecture or the governance or whatever, it's not supporting specific solutions so that needs cannot be fulfilled, that we maybe should change that infrastructure. To get to the point that the patient is optimally served. And then the other thing is that the IT department tends to hold the keys in their hands, so to say, so that they want to have the ultimate decision whether to implement a specific project, and they do the prioritization and stuff like that. And it's really kind of, it's not a fight, but it's a way, a change. People need to change and need to think in another way, so that they really take the medical professional into consideration when make decisions to that regard.
And when we're talking about decision making, or involving IT. I'm thinking about a project that I did in a hospital in Bruges, where I tried to help a cardiologist, which happens to be my father, to implement or develop a teleconsultation way of working. Let's say a workflow. It was a very short project, but in the end, when I talk with the director, medical director, and also when we suggested to the IT, I mean, there are a lot of still, they're not always conflicting interests, as you say, Jacob, but there are many interests at stake. And one of the things that I noticed is that, for instance, in large hospitals, you also have basically outsourced a lot of your IT production, in the sense that you have massive contracts with HICS or these gigantic multinationals who have basically rolled out their software over the entire hospital. And how do you deal with those challenges? Are you still kind of in charge of what's really happening in the end of the line, or are you actually depending a lot on these big companies to whether or not they want to incorporate some new innovation in an electronic medical file. So just to be clear, HICS is, I'm talking about the large electronic medical software programs that are used in hospitals.
Always a struggle, of course, to get what you want and to get also the vendors in the direction that you want. And of course, you have certain degrees of freedom when using a software solution, but you also have to deal with the restrictions of the vendor. And if you are aiming for specific improvements, then they usually tell you to go to this so-called user group, and then through the user group in which all hospitals are represented, then you can give ideas to the vendor, more specifically the EMR vendor in our hospital, Chipsoft, and then they may or may not, usually may not, change specific things in the product.
So are you saying that you're largely depending on them to?
Yeah, so with regard to the EMR, we decided, or the board decided to buy a standard content solution. So that means basically that you buy a kind of fixed product with very limited degrees of freedom, and you use that within the organization.
Mm-hmm. Is that something that is frustrating or hard to work with on a daily basis, or are you working around that in your own way?
Yeah, people are getting used to it, but there is definitely room for improvement. Of course, people can use it in a better way, but I also hear from different physicians within the whole organization that there is still, room for improvement.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. So I'm wondering, what do the others think about like involving? We talked about IT, but let's maybe switch also to Eiji and Andrew, because I guess Christian, from your point of view, I'm assuming that. There are always kind of a lot of people from various backgrounds involved in the projects in Denmark. But I'm wondering from Eiji's standpoint, because robotics is also maybe a more specific technology. Do they always involve robotic experts, or are you also an unwanted party at the table? How is your collaboration with these design projects going?
So for most projects, we work in teams of 4 or 5 people, each one from different areas. And it is much easier to find new ideas or to find missing points when there is someone who has a different point of view. I think involvement with all the parties from the beginning makes the whole project smoother. And then you can see and fix different elements from the beginning. Especially in the engineering part, there are solutions that are much easier to fix from day one than to wait until the end and say, but the whole thing does not connect with the system, so we need to redesign everything from scratch, and then it takes more time and money. So yes, definitely, most of the projects I work with involve a lot of different parties. And we try to smooth out all these imperfections from the beginning to make a more smooth transition at the end.
And is it is it a standard type of stakeholders you always are involved with? So is there always an engineer? Is there always a hospital staff or a patient involved, or does it change all the time?
So when we're trying to design medical devices, it's quite challenging to find the time to sit everyone at the table because we have different schedules. What we usually do is have like meetings every 2 weeks or 1 month, and then try to test the final product at the hospital itself. It's a quite controlled environment because we mostly work with prototypes. We don't know, there might be a lot of unexpected situations. So we try to control as much as possible when developing that.
So is that do you have a good relationship with a particular hospital where you are allowed to use a room for testing, or how does that work in practice?
So for our lab, our major has a specific room that we can change into hospital settings, and our university also has the university hospital. The collaboration is not as direct because there are a lot of procedures we need to take.
Mm-hmm.
But once everything is in order, it's pretty straightforward. The good thing about, at least in the University of Tsukuba, is that between professors, it's quite easy to set meetings and then try to create a project. Most of the projects from the university are sponsored by the government,
Mm-hmm.
so there is an incentive to try to help each other into developing these technologies.
So the hospital, they allow you to do the real world testing inside the hospital?
Depending on the project, not all the time. So we need to talk and then make sure that everything is within the expected parameters.
Okay, thank you. And so Andrew, you're obviously a key person to involve in any of these projects, because at some point communication becomes essential, if not already from the start. And have you been involved in also maybe as a coach or consultant in these kind of innovation projects, or do you know of people who work on the communication aspects and help people with this kind of work during the development of products?
I actually happen to think that it's difficult with these projects. We're also talking a time frame which
Mm-hmm.
is quite long.
Mm-hmm.
So what people want now or need now might be different in 5 or 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
I often think that some of the best people to talk to are actually the investors, and not over a pitch table, but actually to go to lunch or have dinner with investors. Mm-hmm. and get to know what the things they think are important. Mm-hmm. They often are some of the wisest heads because they also see what the competition are at. Mm-hmm. So if you want to get a jump on competition, speak to investors in a social or relaxed way, and they'll often give you the language which can work. Your point about how to reach out and get help with communication. One of the difficulties with people who have a deeply technical background mm-hmm. is they tend to talk a huge amount about the product and not necessarily the problem. Mm-hmm. So they get what's called topic focused. Mm-hmm. And if you're topic focused, you turn into a lecturer and you create a little mini information session. But a pitch is around the idea of persuasion. Mm-hmm. And when we come to persuade, we should be thinking about what turns on the audience. So an investor gets turned on basically by making money. If you're talking to,
but are you really? I mean, that's quite a. I mean, it's maybe straightforward, but is it really like that? Because there is still this ethical, let's say, framework in healthcare that I don't know. Maybe we can afterwards also check with the others. But do you have experience with in healthcare? Is that also really the primarily objective? Because some of their visions are very patient-centric, or is that just a facade? And in the essence, it's just about making profit. And
I'll come in first and hand it over to the rest of the panel. My experience of working in a sustainable environment, which is about the existential threat of the extinction of humankind. I worked on a large project trying to raise €500 million, and everything was around money. Yeah. And secondary was the concern for humankind's existence. Okay. So you need to be able to be commercially viable, and everything else follows second.
Okay. What do the others think about the priorities of the board of directors or the clients? Is that is commercial interests really always the first thing they think about? Or if not, how do you communicate your product to the clients in the end? any of you want to jump in with that? I don't know if Christian, maybe from your department. I mean, you work with a lot of different institutions, maybe public institutions. Perhaps that's slightly different there.
Well, we also work with private companies in public-private innovation partnerships, and I think there's definitely an economic interest from that party in regards. But then there's also the interest from the public sector in regards to if we go into a co-development process where a private company ends up with a solution that can be utilized in a range of different hospitals or different settings, how can we reach an agreement where it's mutually beneficial for all parties involved in regards to that? That might be, for instance, a lowered costs of utilizing the software for so and so many years on forward, or it could be it could also be a stake in the final product that allows the public sector to also benefit from potential sales of that. There are many different ways that you can put this together, but definitely it's one of the focuses that we have at the Health Innovation Center of Southern Denmark is public-private partnerships, and how can we put those together.
Is there a financial advisor or analyst who helps you then in this final phase to kind of line up the key economic benefits, or is that something that the team does automatically anyway?
Well, we have we have a staff at the Health Innovation Center with focus on the economic aspects of business cases and so forth. But we can also collaborate with the rest of the region of Southern Denmark in regards to economic questions, and also in regards to IT, which we touched upon earlier. We also collaborate with them at an early stage.
And maybe, I don't know if you have any questions for Andrew, but do you, when you, in your experience, when you try to pitch these new innovations, is it always a fluent process, or do you have particular challenges when you are when you're trying to finally then sell it off to the client, or finally implement it in the healthcare system?
Well, I think what I've been doing for the last few years is taking innovation out of this unregulated field where it's basically anything goes, and innovation can't be, there cannot possibly be any governance, because then we'll strangle all the innovative potential. I've been working a lot with bringing innovation into the regular governance on how we talk about IT within the region of Southern Denmark. So now it's actually the same governance board that decides which type of electronic medical record system do we need. Are also the same people that greenlight these digital innovation projects. So that's one of the ways that we've been working with, taking digital innovation more closely into the mainstream business model in the region.
So actually what you've done, if I understand correctly, is you've kind of created your own board of decision makers in a sense, or
it's actually the same board of decision makers. So the same board of decision makers that decide which system do we need in order to capture X-rays, which system do we need in order to capture electronic medical records. They are the same board of decision makers that decide which digital innovation projects are going to be moving forward. At least those that involve an implementation at our hospitals. We also have a long range of projects which which are more experimental in regards to we're trying out a different aspect along with one of our hospitals that doesn't necessarily end up with an implementation. We can definitely still do those, but at the time when we realize this needs to be implemented at a hospital, we use the same governance structure as any type of IT system in the region.
Yeah, so you're saying you actually helped them to evaluate innovations in general. You help the board of directors in a way to, is that what you're trying to say, that you?
Well, more trying to say that we sort of adapted the way that we describe innovation products into a way that we would usually describe what would be classically called the IT products. And in that way, it allows us to review them and think about them in the same way and use the same assessment that we would utilize an IT project. We can use that those same business processes and the same governance structure for digital innovation products.
Yes, that's seems like a very smart move to do. Coming back also to the point of Andrew, that you need to speak the same language as the board of directors. I don't know, what's the situation, Jacob, in Erasmus MC? Is the board really, are they closely working together with you or with the department, or are they like some distant people who only will look at some business case figures and then decide whether it's a go or a no-go?
Yeah, so for the Erasmus MC, we have the so-called Koers 23. That's a 5-year plan with a mission and a vision. And one of the things is eHealth and data. So they are very much, committed to invest in new technologies. That's also been confirmed by their approval yesterday for a $1 million budget.
Wow.
Of course, we have to deal with budget constraints because of COVID, but I think they are definitely involved, and they see and acknowledge the way that healthcare is moving.
How do you? I mean, it seems to me like that's an exceptional case. I'm from Belgium, but I mean, in any case, the Netherlands seems to be moving always on a much further pace faster pace than Belgium regarding innovation. But how do you look at that issue? That looks quite amazing to work in such a hospital with such an involved board of directors. Is that special to you as well, or do you see that happening all over the Netherlands, or is that
No, I think we are in a very special position, as you may know, that we do have the so-called convergence, in which we aim to be the first technical university medical center in the Netherlands. That involves the close collaboration between the TU in Delft, the Technical University in Delft, the Erasmus University, which you are part of by yourself, and also the Erasmus Medical Center. So these guys are definitely aiming for that to be in the forefront of innovation and also the technical innovation.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and Eiji, maybe just to come back to you, what are the key challenges for you when you're trying to collaborate with the clients or investors when you're trying to finalize your robotic projects? Do you have a good collaboration with the investors and clients, or?
So the main focus of our laboratory and department in general is more academic, research-oriented. Most of the funding is through the university or the government, so we don't have that much experience with the client one-on-one.
So you hope that Andrew will now take on your award-winning designs and then share those ideas in London. So yeah, okay. No, but Andrew, so we've heard that there are a lot of varieties in collaboration with clients and board of directors. It's quite a complex environment in healthcare. But can you elaborate a bit more about your work and how you talked a lot about behavior change. You talked about communicating, but if we're talking about pitching, how do you how do you pitch the innovations that we're talking about? Maybe you can give some information about that.
So there's a number of ways one can do that, but I try to help people both with. So there's 5 things that one would think about. We go back to the Greeks and we think about how they communicated, and they've pretty much nailed the art of communication a couple of thousand years ago. Mm-hmm. And the things that are important, the 2 things one should think about are the structure and also how you deliver that structure and that information. So the structure, it's always key to commence with the idea of the problem. So you talk about the problem that you're solving, but you talk about the problem that you're solving in a particular way, which is you talk about the problem in the past, you talk about the problem today, and then you talk about the problem in the future. So you've got to bear in mind that most investors, for example, are interested in the future. Mm-hmm. But I guarantee that 99.9% of startups and new businesses focus solely on today. Mm-hmm. So your capacity to have a vision for the future will be extremely important. And then you reveal your solution. But your capacity to articulate the problem in a compelling manner defines the value of your solution. Mm-hmm. Whereas most people just talk about the solution and then they might come on to the problem. Mm-hmm. Okay. The second thing to be mindful of is your capacity to get your audience to actually believe in what you're saying. And for a lot of people, a lot of clever people coming from deeply technical backgrounds, they are not always comfortable with communicating their idea, and therefore they talk in a manner which is cold, analytical, and pretty flat and emotionally cold, mm-hmm. which does not help convey your belief in your solution. So if you fail to communicate belief, then everything else is doubted and your audience moves into a skeptical mode where they're effectively going into a system 2 thinking, where they move backwards and they're analysing you. What you really want your audience to be is convinced and hooked into the idea of a story, where they move into a system 1 mode of thinking, which is intuitive and familiar and comfortable and quick and easy. And we begin to get that if we are communicating in a manner which is believable. And normally we would do that through evoking a sense of emotion. So online, mm-hmm. there are a number of things we can do to convince the audience that we are actually really committed to this problem. And we can do that through speaking more loudly. We can do that by using our hands. Instead of using these kind of gestures, we start to talk very directly with our hands. And these are all unconscious signals to the audience that me, the person pitching, actually really cares about the solution. Because the probability of your solution today being successful is slim. The probability in 5 years' time of you being still committed to coming up with a solution, that's what really investors are looking for. Are you going to go through hell to deliver a solution which is profitable and makes them money? And for that, you need commitment and you need an emotional connection to the problem.
And when you mention this story, I mean, it seems like I've seen maybe some pitches do that, but it seems still to be a very maybe underestimated form of communication that is highly emotional in a sense. My students are also quite academic, of course. They're bachelor students, so I guess they would fall back easily on the technical mode. Would you recommend that they kind of either practice the pitch or actually maybe choose the person of their group who is best at communicating emotions? Is that something that you would recommend?
So I'm English and therefore, or British, and emotions therefore are dead to me. Emotions are something that my parents told me to never show. Therefore, if I was working with someone that perhaps worked in a Latin country or perhaps came from South America, they're very comfortable with expressing emotion. So I would put them up front, and I'll put them up front for the emotional side, which is the problem, and then perhaps move into the solution. And then I would, being the cold, hard-faced Anglo-Saxon, will probably come up and talk about the analytical part. I'll talk about the numbers, talk about the market, talk about the competition, etc., etc. But I would front up with someone that's very comfortable with being emotional. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so I think we're reaching the end of the online panel discussion here. So if the students have further questions, are you open for some questions? Can I pass on your or maybe they can contact me and I can contact you then? Is that okay with everybody? Okay.
Yes.
Perfect.
Sure. No
So I would say, does anybody else want to add something more, or are we good like this? Okay, so I would say thank you very much again for joining this online panel discussion. You've all been very active, and your contributions were highly valuable. So thank you very much for joining me here in the online panel discussion.